The most powerful moments in history aren't always marked by loud cheers or grand speeches. Sometimes they happen in quiet rooms with a pen in hand and a heart full of fear. This is the story of a family standing at a crossroads, a father who had to let go, and a son who had to take hold of something he never truly wanted to take. It's a tale of whispered arguments and sealed letters, of tears hidden behind brave faces, and of a date that would change everything. June 2nd, 2027. That is the day the world was told a new chapter would begin, but the announcement lasted less than 3 minutes, and yet every second of it shattered decades of expectation. This is a dramatized story inspired by royal themes, but it is not real. It is not confirmed. It is simply a tale of power, love, and the heavy cost of a crown. Imagine a prince and princess standing side by side at a simple lectern. No fanfare, no grand stage, just a short, clear statement. The date was set. June 2nd, 2027. The place, an ancient and beautiful church where kings and queens have been crowned for centuries, but if you look closely you would have seen something deeper. The prince, who would one day be king, tightened his grip on the lectern. His knuckles were white. He said the date twice, and that small pause, that tiny hesitation, told a story he could never say out loud. He was not just announcing a ceremony. He was announcing the end of his father's reign. His wife, the princess, stood beside him, her expression calm and proud. She held his hand when the cameras stopped, but beneath her gentle smile there was a shadow. She knew what was coming. She knew the crown would not just change their names or their titles. It would reshape their lives, narrow their privacy, and place their 3 young children under a harsher spotlight than ever before. She looked at her husband and asked a question only he could hear. "Are you ready?" He looked back at her and said, "We have to be." That was not confidence. That was courage. Courage does not mean you aren't afraid. It means you do what must be done anyway. Behind closed doors in a quiet room far from the cameras, the current king heard those same words. He watched the announcement on a screen. He stared at it in silence. His glasses were in his hand. He didn't move. He didn't speak. The date meant the end of his own time as the sovereign. It meant he had agreed to step aside. And while he had made that choice himself, hearing it spoken to the whole world made it real in a way he could no longer ignore. Beside him rested a thick file, the official plan for the coronation. He opened it slowly. One line had been crossed out in dark ink. A new date was written beneath it by hand. June 2nd had not been the first choice. The original plan was for months later, but a secret disagreement, a fight nobody knew about, had forced the prince to demand an earlier transition. That fight cut deeper than anyone understood. The nation was given a date, a simple date, but behind that date stood 4 people whose private sacrifices had made it possible. A father releasing his life's work. A son taking on a burden he never wanted while his father was still alive. A wife becoming queen while trying to protect her children from the world. And another woman, the queen consort, facing a future where her influence would end the moment another woman received the crown. The prince had prepared for kingship since he was a child. He had been trained, shaped, and molded for this role. But there is one thing no training can prepare you for. He had always imagined the crown arriving through grief after his father had passed away. He never imagined he would receive it while his father was still living, still breathing, still able to hear the bells that would announce his replacement. That difference mattered. It turned duty into guilt. It turned victory into something dangerously close to betrayal. The princess felt that same pressure in a different way. She would become queen, the most important woman in the new reign, but she was still a mother. She still had 3 children who needed love, safety, and normalcy. After the announcement, she went to her eldest son's room. She found him reading the public reactions on a screen. She gently closed the device and said, "You are still allowed to be a child." The young boy looked at her with serious eyes and asked, "Will that still be true after the ceremony?" She promised it would. But even as she said it, she knew the crown had already begun changing his life. That promise, made with love, was one she wasn't entirely sure she could keep. The king sat alone in his study. Red boxes full of official papers that needed his attention were stacked around him. He placed a hand on the final coronation briefing and then asked an aide to remove it. He had agreed to step aside to protect the monarchy. He believed it was the right thing to do, but another fear tortured him. What if history called his sacrifice a failure? What if he was remembered as the king who gave up too soon? His wife, the queen consort, understood that fear. In their private home, she poured him tea and asked very quietly whether the date was truly his son's choice. He did not answer right away. That silence told her everything. The date had come from pressure, not complete agreement. Her influence, built over years of hard work, was fading. She knew that the moment the new queen was crowned, her own role would shrink. Everything she had fought for, her place, her voice, her security, would be gone. The king's sister, a princess known for her sharp mind and steady heart, refused to let private pain become a public disaster. During a private family meeting, she warned her brother that any visible hesitation would hurt both his reign and his son's. The king listened, but his face hardened. He did not like being told what to do, but the truth was undeniable. The transition had to be handled with grace or it would fall apart. The princess carried another secret during all of this. A trusted palace worker had given her a private letter. It had been written by the late queen, the former monarch, for the woman who would one day follow her as the senior female figure. She had not opened it yet. She was afraid of what it might say. The prince also received a warning. The king would support the coronation, but only if one final condition was accepted. To understand why a father would place conditions on his son's coronation, we have to go back to a private moment that changed everything. It didn't happen in a palace or a public hall. It happened during a quiet rehearsal at an ancient chapel. The king was leading the ceremony. He reached a certain point, then stopped. He looked in the wrong direction. He didn't move when he was supposed to. The prince stepped forward. Without being told, he whispered the correct instruction and completed the sequence. It was just a few seconds, but those seconds said more than any speech could. The crown was already shifting. The father was struggling, and the son was ready. After the rehearsal, in a small room behind the chapel, the father turned on his son. He accused him of looking too ready to take control. The prince clenched his ceremonial gloves and answered with a truth that cut through the air like a knife. He said, "I acted because you looked frightened." That single word wounded the king more deeply than any criticism ever could. The prince walked out holding his gloves so tightly that the leather had folded across his palm. He admitted to his wife that helping his father had felt like a betrayal. Every instinct told him to protect his father, while every duty demanded he prepare to replace him. The princess met with the king later. She warned him that the chapel incident was not humiliation, it was a warning. A controlled transition could preserve his dignity. A sudden crisis could destroy everything. That night the king acted. He ordered constitutional advisors to prepare two plans. One was a regency, a temporary transfer of duties. The other was an abdication, a permanent surrender of the throne. He didn't want to do it, but he knew he had no other choice. The original coronation date was set for autumn, but the prince opposed the delay. He had received confidential information that made an earlier date necessary. The king finally accepted June 2nd, but he demanded that one disputed moment be removed from the ceremony. That demand would soon bring father and son into the same room without advisors, without cameras, without any protection. Just two men facing each other across a table, with a document that would decide their future. The confrontation began with no raised voices. The king sat at one end of a long table. The prince sat at the other. Between them rested the order of service, the official plan for the coronation. One paragraph had been crossed out in black ink. It concerned the moment the former sovereign would publicly pledge loyalty to the new king. The king called it unnecessary humiliation. The prince called it the only gesture capable of ending dangerous speculation. The king ordered every aide from the room. He closed the door himself. The room belonged to father and son now. The king pointed to the crossed-out passage and said he would not kneel before his own child while millions watched. The prince held his anger in check. He argued that the pledge was not designed to shame his father. It was meant to give the country absolute clarity. The people needed to see that the outgoing sovereign accepted the new monarch without hesitation. Even one uncertain gesture could feed rumors of division. The king pushed the document across the table and said, "You have prepared to receive the crown. You have never prepared to release it." His voice remained controlled, but his words carried years of sacrifice. His reign, however short, had consumed his identity. Kneeling would reduce all of that to one image of surrender. The prince stood so suddenly that his chair moved backward. He admitted that he had spent his life preparing for the death of a parent. He had never prepared for something more painful. He was replacing a father who remained alive, aware, and able to hear another man called king. He said the crown did not feel like victory. It felt like taking something his father still loved. The confession changed the room. The king looked away. The fury in his face weakened, but pride held him still. For nearly 2 hours, neither man surrendered. The princess entered only after an aide told her the meeting had gone silent. She found the document between them and exhaustion on both faces. She refused to choose a side. Instead, she asked whether either man wanted the first lasting image of the new reign to be one of resentment between father and son. The king finally offered a compromise. He would make the pledge while standing. He would recognize his son's sovereignty without appearing conquered. The future king accepted. Neither smiled, but the danger between them eased. Then the king revealed a deeper threat. Someone inside the household had already contacted senior coronation organizers and attempted to change the program without authority. The argument between father and son had reached a compromise, but the greater battle was unfolding through private offices and ceremonial committees. The queen consort had no authority to stop the coronation, but she still possessed relationships built across years. She intended to secure her husband's place before the new reign erased her influence. She privately contacted the department responsible for major ceremonies. Through a documented request, she asked for the king's role to be expanded. She asked for a permanent ceremonial position to be created for him after abdication. She also proposed that they enter the church immediately before the prince and princess, preserving the old hierarchy even as the crown changed hands. The princess discovered the alteration while reviewing the latest procession papers. Her arrival had been moved several minutes earlier without explanation. She marked the page, closed the folder, and told her secretary not to alert her husband yet. She wanted one conversation before the dispute became a confrontation. The queen consort met her privately. She defended her request without apology. The princess told her the ceremony could honor the past without weakening the authority of the future. The queen consort answered that gratitude should never be confused with erasure. Her voice was steady until the princess asked what she truly feared. The queen consort's control broke. She admitted she feared becoming irrelevant the instant another woman was crowned. She had fought for decades to gain acceptance. Now she believed the new reign would reduce her to a footnote. The princess listened but refused to surrender the principle at stake. Personal fear could not be allowed to distort constitutional clarity. The king's sister intervened before the conflict widened. She told the organizers to remove every unofficial revision and restore the approved procession. She warned that mixed signals would make the transition appear contested, damaging both the king and the prince. The king learned what had happened through the amended planning file. He felt betrayed, not because the queen consort wanted to protect him, but because her actions made him look unwilling to release power. The final plan gave him a dignified entrance while leaving the prince and princess as the undisputed center. The procession was restored. Yet the cost of that victory became clear when the king returned home and confronted the woman who had tried to protect him without his permission. The public saw rehearsals and polished statements. Inside their home, the atmosphere was far colder. The king asked her one question: why had she acted in his name? Her answer did not begin with politics. It began with fear. The fear that when the prince became king, the life they had built would disappear overnight. She admitted that she believed palace organizers were already treating the king like a retired figure before his reign had officially ended. Every altered schedule and shortened appearance felt like a warning that he was being removed before he had chosen to leave. The revised procession plan had seemed to her like one final chance to protect his dignity. The king did not accept the defense. He told her that the intervention had strengthened the exact suspicion he was trying to destroy. He said, "Symbols become dangerous when people value them more than trust." The queen consort left without replying. She sat alone in the adjoining room while aides passed at a careful distance. No one approached her. The silence hurt more than rebuke because it confirmed that her influence had already begun to shrink. The prince learned of the confrontation through a briefing from the household secretary. His first response was severe. He wanted the queen consort excluded from every remaining planning meeting. The princess stopped him. She warned that punishment could turn a constitutional correction into a personal war. The new reign could not begin by humiliating those it claimed to reconcile. The princess went to the king herself. She told him that her husband's succession did not require his disappearance. It required his visible confidence in those who would follow him. The monarch finally admitted that watching his son prepare felt like seeing his own life converted into history while he was still living it. She answered that history would judge how he left power as deeply as how he used it. The fallout came quickly. Coronation papers were placed under tighter control. Every alteration required direct approval. Informal household channels were removed from the process. The change protected the transition, but it also exposed how little trust remained. The prince's eldest son overheard part of a family discussion. Later, he asked his father whether becoming king meant losing his grandfather. The prince froze. Son's question revealed that the children were absorbing every silence, every closed door, every strained conversation. The prince went to his father that evening not as heir but as a son. He found the study empty. On the desk lay the unsigned abdication document, the legal paper that would permanently end the king's reign. The empty chair left the prince facing the full loneliness of succession. The princess found him beside the unsigned document. She forced him to confront what he truly feared. No advisor witnessed the moment that finally secured the coronation. There were no cameras, no officials, no experts. Only the prince and princess standing together beside the document that would make them king and queen. He confessed that he could command a ceremony but could not promise that the crown would leave their family untouched. She answered by placing the late queen's sealed letter between them and breaking its wax. He did not hide behind duty. He admitted that his greatest fear was not failing as king, but becoming so consumed by the role that his children would grow up feeling the same emotional distance he remembered from childhood. The princess confessed that she feared the crown too. She knew the public would expect calm even during exhaustion, grief, and private family strain. She worried that strength would be measured by how little pain she showed. Then she unfolded the late queen's letter. The message was direct. It warned them never to confuse silence with strength or duty with the absence of love. The monarchy, it said, survives only when the people wearing the crown remain recognizably human inside their own family. The prince read the words twice. His expression changed as the burden before them became a choice rather than a sentence. He wrote a private promise beneath the coronation oath. Their children would never be treated merely as future instruments of the institution. They would understand duty, but they would also know affection, honesty, and freedom from fear. The princess agreed to stand beside him, not as decoration, but as an active partner shaping the values of the reign. The king entered only after his son invited him. The prince told the king that the new monarchy would honor his service without pretending the transition was painless. The monarch listened, then sat before the abdication instrument. He signed. He put down the pen and asked that history remember the decision as protection, not retreat. The prince answered that it would. Father and son embraced briefly, ending the conflict that had threatened to poison the coronation before it began. The princess lifted the signed document but did not call in aid. She allowed both men several silent moments to accept what had happened. One reign had ended, another had become inevitable. With his signature complete and the family finally united, the palace released the full coronation program. The world responded with an image no private meeting could have predicted. By sunrise, the coronation date had moved beyond palace walls and into the streets. Newspapers carried the same image. The prince and princess holding hands after their announcement, with the king visible behind them in the doorway. The photograph captured succession without hostility and sadness without defeat. Yet the strongest public reaction did not appear in print. It gathered outside the palace where hundreds stood beneath one handwritten message. A child lifted a sign above the crowd that read, "Thank you, we are ready." The word spread across broadcasts within minutes. They honored the departing monarch without rejecting the future. That balance became the emotional center of the day. One broadcaster described the announcement as a transition of service rather than a transfer born from crisis. A leading newspaper placed the three royals on its front page with the headline, "One crown, two reigns." Suspicion began giving way to acceptance. The prince watched the crowd coverage with his eldest son beside him. The young boy said the sign seemed to honor both his grandfather and his father. The prince looked away, visibly moved, because his son had understood what adults had struggled to express for weeks. The princess received thousands of messages praising her as both a mother and future queen. The response carried its own pressure, but it also showed that the public expected the new reign to feel more human, more open, and less distant. The king answered the final doubt through a recorded address. He declared that his confidence in the prince and princess was complete. The queen consort stood beside him but remained silent. Afterwards, she met the princess privately and apologized for trying to alter the procession. The princess accepted the apology, but she made one boundary clear. Private fear could never again interfere with public duty. The queen consort agreed. The country had accepted the date. The king had released the crown. The family had survived its private struggle. And on June 2, 2027, the bells of the ancient church announced more than the beginning of a reign. They marked the completion of a difficult promise between a father, a son, and the woman who had held their family together. The prince entered, carrying the burden of expectation. The princess walked beside him, carrying the strength of quiet endurance. The king arrived not as a defeated monarch, but as the man whose final act protected the crown. They entered together, making the meaning of the day unmistakable. This would not be a solitary rise to power, it would be a partnership. The sacred ceremony placed the future of the monarchy upon both of them. Their shared entrance showed that duty would no longer be carried in emotional isolation. The king took his designated place without hesitation. He allowed the incoming couple to command the ceremony. The queen consort did not attempt to reclaim the influence she had once feared losing. Their restraint mattered because one wrong gesture could have revived every rumor of bitterness that the family had worked so hard to silence. The decisive moment came during the formal pledge. The king stood, looked directly at the prince, and promised loyalty to the new sovereign in a clear, steady voice. The words ended all remaining doubt. The new king briefly lowered his head before answering, acknowledging not only a former monarch but a father whose sacrifice had made peaceful succession possible. The princess received her crown moments later. She immediately looked toward her children. Her first instinct was not triumph, it was reassurance. Her eldest son appeared overwhelmed by the scale of what had happened, but the new king met his eyes and gave a calm nod, reminding the young boy of the private promise that no child would become merely an instrument of the institution. The king's sister watched after the crowns were placed. She saw something finally leave her brother's face. The tension was gone. She understood that he had not lost the monarchy in that moment. He had protected it by knowing when to release it. The queen consort approached the new queen after the service and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was final. She accepted that her influence had changed, while the new queen made clear that a valued place within the family still remained. The new king's first address honored his father's service, his wife's courage, and the public's trust. He promised a monarchy built upon responsibility, openness, and compassion. Then he left the church beside his wife, not as a son who had defeated his father, but as a successor who had completed his work. The king's abdication was not the collapse of his kingship, it was its most selfless expression. The coronation succeeded because the family chose reconciliation over rivalry, clarity over ambition, and service over possession of power. The crown had passed, the conflict had ended, and a new reign began with the one victory no ceremony could manufacture: a family entering the future without abandoning one another.